Rain streaked the glass towers of Midtown, a blur of light and color that hid what the Bureau had begun to suspect. Every new pane of glass in the city carried a price. The paperwork called it labor adjustment, cost of materials, installation variance. The Genovese family called it tribute. They did not own the Skyline, but they taxed it, one window at a time. Frank Delaney leaned against the cold metal frame of the observation van, listening to the thrum of generators and traffic. He had come from the Palmer Boys operation, a victory that already felt like defeat. The tapes had exposed more ghosts than men. Now he stood watching another kind of empire, a corporation that built nothing yet billed millions. Carla Ruiz sat at the small table, her eyes on the procurement sheets scattered across it. She circled duplicate line items, matching invoice numbers with delivery slips. Her pencil marks formed a constellation of theft. 2 companies, same job number, same quantity, 2 different totals. The smaller number appeared on public records, the larger on private ledgers seized months earlier. The gap, a silent current of cash, ran through the city's veins straight to the family's accountants. The Bureau had nicknamed it Operation Clearview. It began with a whistle from a building inspector who noticed that several municipal contracts used identical bid language. Ruiz traced the text through digital archives and found they had all been typed on the same machine. The contractor of record had never owned a typewriter. The style matched a model issued to the Bureau's financial division years ago. They drove to Long Island City that night, following the route of a delivery truck listed under Crescent Supply. The rain turned the streets to glass. Through the windshield, Delaney watched pallets of window panes unloaded into a warehouse with no signage. Men in work jackets moved quickly, heads down, never speaking. Each crate carried a code in black marker. Ruiz photographed the sequence. Later, she would discover those codes corresponded to offshore account numbers. Inside the Bureau, the language was different. The supervisors called it procurement irregularity. The agents called it theft in daylight. Delaney called it proof that the family had evolved beyond the old trades. No more protection rackets, no more street shakedowns. This was white-collar feudalism. The city paid tribute through contracts and forms. They bugged the warehouse office under cover of a safety inspection. A small transmitter hidden inside a smoke detector fed static and voices to a real recorder in the van outside. Through the hiss, they heard orders given in calm, precise tones. 3 trucks tomorrow, 2 to the courthouse, 1 to the school. Make sure the blue slips are stamped. The voice belonged to a contractor already under federal watch for bid rigging in another borough. Each mention of blue slips matched an internal authorization form used by the city's Department of Public Works. Ruiz checked the timestamps. The approvals came before the bids were officially submitted. Someone inside the department was feeding figures directly to the mob-linked firms. Delaney requested surveillance on the department's procurement office. Cameras captured late-night visitors carrying folders and coffee cups. One of them was an analyst, once seconded to the Bureau's own budget team. He had left under quiet circumstances after a disciplinary review for data manipulation. The connection froze Delaney mid-sentence when Ruiz showed him the photos. They brought the evidence to Assistant Director Morelli. He nodded once, told them to proceed carefully, and closed the folder without comment. Outside his office, Ruiz whispered that the reaction felt rehearsed. Delaney did not answer. He knew what it meant when superiors showed no curiosity. Weeks passed as they built the pattern. The Genovese operation ran through 3 visible tiers: Tier 1, suppliers and contractors; Tier 2, labor unions controlling installation crews; Tier 3, shell consultants who laundered profit through offshore invoices. Each tier paid a handling fee upward, 10% here, 5% there, folded into budgets, disguised as taxes and freight. Every dollar that moved left a faint trace on the books, enough for Ruiz to reconstruct the hierarchy. In March, the Bureau executed synchronized raids. Trucks rolled into warehouses across Queens and Brooklyn. They seized ledgers, disks, and payment vouchers. The numbers told a simple story. Between 1981 and 1988, nearly $1 billion in city funds had been siphoned through mob-controlled vendors. Television called it a triumph. Agents carrying boxes past flashing cameras, reporters shouting questions, headlines promising the end of corruption. But inside the field office, the air was heavy. The seized files contained something they had not expected: copies of internal bureau memoranda used to forecast investigation costs. Someone had handed the family the bureau's playbook. Ruiz stayed late that night, reading through the recovered discs. Among the spreadsheets, she found a hidden sheet protected by password. The password was a bureau case code from 2 years earlier, one that only her team had used. When she broke it, the screen filled with bid data written months before the public tenders existed. Delaney joined her at the monitor, the pattern repeated from every contract they had traced. The bids were not manipulated after submission. They were authored by insiders before the process began. The Mafia had simply inherited a system already compromised. They met the informant again, Leo Gallo, now relocated under protection. Gallo explained how the racket worked in practice. Crews would replace windows for public buildings at inflated rates. Half the labor was fictitious. The money cycled through payroll to shell employees, dead relatives, retirees, false names. The checks cashed by mules, the cash funneled to union officials, and from there to the family's accountants. "Nobody gets hurt," Gallo said. "That's the genius. It's all paper." Ruiz asked who designed it. Gallo shrugged. "Some guy from the city, maybe a Fed. We just followed the pattern." The morning air over the East River carried the smell of concrete dust and diesel. The raids had ended, but the city was still waking up from its illusion of clean hands. Contractors denied everything. Union bosses blamed accounting errors. Politicians promised reform. The Bureau had what it needed: evidence, headlines, and a number big enough to impress Washington. But Ruiz could not shake what she saw on the discs. The figures were too perfect, too organized. No mob crew could have built that alone. Delaney kept the team quiet. He filed reports that read like routine closure memos. Internally, he copied Ruiz's decrypted files onto magnetic tape and stored them in the mirror locker, the same anonymous safe that held fragments of the Palmer Boys' reels. He did not trust chain of custody, not anymore. That week, Ruiz attended a debriefing at the Manhattan field office. The conference room smelled of stale coffee and victory. Morelli stood at the front, praising coordination between the organized crime task force and city auditors. He spoke of transparency, oversight, partnership. Ruiz watched the faces around the table. Some were tired, some proud. One she recognized from the procurement videos, the former bureau analyst, now listed as consultant to the audit team. She wrote his name on the edge of her notebook and underlined it twice. After the meeting, she found Delaney in the garage beside the van they had used for surveillance. He was cleaning the equipment himself, silent. When she told him what she saw, he did not look up. He only said, "We are being managed." They decided to follow the money. Every seized account had a corresponding withdrawal from a city vendor fund. Ruiz traced one sequence to a brokerage in Jersey. The transfers always ended the same way: deposits into an escrow under the name Glenridge Holdings. The company owned nothing, sold nothing, yet moved tens of millions a year. Its registered address was a law office that specialized in government compliance. The partners at that firm had represented federal agencies in past audits. Delaney requested surveillance authority. Headquarters denied it. The memo cited insufficient nexus. Ruiz read it twice, then whispered that someone was protecting the pipeline. Weeks later, a courier delivered a brown envelope to Delaney's apartment. Inside was a single photograph. It showed a line of men in suits standing at a construction site. At the edge of the frame, half hidden behind a truck, stood the same consultant Ruiz had seen at the debriefing. On the back, a typed note read, "He wrote the bids." Delaney brought it to Morelli. The assistant director scanned it, sighed, and placed it face down on his desk. "Frank," he said, "you are chasing ghosts. This case is over." Outside the office, Ruiz waited in the hallway. Delaney handed her the photo and said nothing. They both knew what it meant. The family had infiltrated oversight, not enforcement. By owning the accountants, they owned the verdict. The Bureau held a press conference that Friday. Cameras flashed. Agents in dark suits stood behind podiums. They called it the most successful anti-corruption operation in Bureau history. The mayor thanked them for protecting taxpayers. Reporters asked about links to organized crime. The official line was simple: leadership isolated, structure dismantled, case closed. Ruiz watched on a small television in the records room. She turned down the volume and stared at the reflection of her face on the screen. That night, she visited the evidence warehouse in Queens. The boxes from Operation Clearview were stacked in rows, each labeled with dates and case numbers. She found the one marked CW 1147. Inside were ledgers, photographs, and a folder stamped confidential. She opened it and found financial summaries printed on bureau letterhead. The totals matched the offshore transfers. Every audit sheet bore Morelli's initials. She copied the pages, scanned them to microfilm, and left the originals untouched. Back at her apartment, she laid the film strips on her table under a lamp. The images shimmered faintly, lines of text and numbers glowing in the yellow light. She realized the family did not need to buy the bureau. They had built a parallel version of it, a reflection where every safeguard was mirrored and twisted. Delaney joined her after midnight. They spoke quietly over takeout containers, the city's noise filling the silence between sentences. He told her he had received a call from Washington, a transfer offer to internal affairs. She asked if he would take it. He said yes, because the only way to expose rot was from the inside. The next morning he was gone. Ruiz continued her audit work alone. She catalogued every recovered file, adding notes about discrepancies, cross-referencing with city payroll. The pattern was endless. For every exposed company, another emerged. When investigators froze one account, funds reappeared elsewhere under a new name. The machine adapted faster than oversight could follow. In June, a new scandal broke in the papers. A whistleblower alleged that municipal inspectors had falsified safety certificates for newly installed windows across several boroughs. The glass panels had been imported cheaply and did not meet standards. The contracts again led back to shell suppliers connected to Crescent Supply. The Bureau announced a review, but quietly redirected blame to subcontractors. Ruiz sat in her office reading the article when the phone rang. A voice she did not recognize said, "Check the mirrors." The line went dead. She opened the mirror locker that evening. The tapes and discs were still there, but one folder was missing: the decrypted bid files. She drove to Delaney's old apartment. It was empty, lease terminated. The superintendent said the agent had left town 2 weeks earlier. On the kitchen counter, she found a single envelope addressed to her. Inside was a cassette tape labeled with a date and the word Echo. She played it on her dictaphone. Delaney's voice, steady but tired, filled the room. "If you are hearing this, it means they reached deeper than we thought. Keep what you can. The truth is not about proof anymore. It is about memory." The recording ended with ambient noise, the hum of fluorescent lights, the faint rattle of blinds, a chair creaking. Ruiz replayed it twice, memorizing every sound. Then she placed the tape in a separate envelope and mailed it to herself at her bureau address, ensuring it would enter the official system under trace. Weeks turned into months. The Windows case faded from headlines. City budgets continued, contracts renewed, glass replaced. The Skyline shone brighter than ever. Ruiz kept working, filing reports no one read. Occasionally she saw the consultant from the debriefing in corridors at headquarters. He always smiled as if nothing had ever happened. One autumn evening, she walked past a newly finished courthouse. The facade gleamed with perfect symmetry, hundreds of reflective windows catching the sunset. For a moment, she saw her own face multiplied 100 times, fading into gold. She wondered how many of those panes had been part of the old contracts. Inside, maintenance workers cleaned floors. She stood on the sidewalk watching their reflections move across the glass. It looked like the city was erasing itself. A voice called her name. She turned. A young agent approached with a package marked Internal Delivery. It contained a single CD and a printed memo. The memo read, "Recovered audio, source unknown." She inserted the disc into her laptop. Static, then a voice, Morelli's, unmistakable. "Tell them the numbers were blessed. Keep the mirrors clean." She sat back, pulse slowing. The phrase repeated, looping softly. She saved the file under a neutral name and encrypted it. Then she closed the laptop and walked out into the night. The next morning she delivered her resignation. No explanation, no farewell. The director's office accepted it without question. She left the bureau with one small box of personal items and the CD hidden among them. Years later, long after the glass racket was forgotten, Ruiz taught auditing at a small university in upstate New York. Students asked about corruption cases. She told them systems fail not because of greed, but because of familiarity. The moment when oversight becomes routine and everyone stops looking at reflections. Sometimes, late at night, she replayed the old cassette from Delaney. The noise, the chair, the hum, all that remained of a war fought on paper. The skyline of New York still glittered on the evening news, 1,000 windows shining like polished lies. And in the end, the city kept replacing its glass pane by pane, while the echoes behind it never stopped.